2:45. This is 2:46 right now. We're live.
Great.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back. We are here for another one of your questions about work. And today we're asking one of these like classic center of the fairway type, how do you do something questions. But the twist is we're answering it with somebody who has a very different perspective on it. And I know this because I've seen him at work for a long time. Amit and I first met when he was at MySpace, where you weren't yet COO, but you were like on your trajectory to being COO of MySpace, back when MySpace had a capital S and didn't suck, when it was still a thing. And then you started a company that was personalizing recommendations for the internet that AOL acquired. You were an exec at AOL for a while when AOL didn't suck. And now Amit started a new company that's a hiring platform to help startups hire that's called WhoCo. So Amit, thank you. And the question today is, I'm about to interview somebody. What are the best questions for me to ask?
Okay. Well, so the first thing is like, you know, if that's what you're going into it, like you're just about to hire somebody, what question to ask, like you've done it wrong. Because you got to start this process much before the like, oh crap, I have an interview in 10 minutes. So kind of just taking a step back from all of that. And I've made every mistake in the book interviewing, hired, done thousands of interviews, hired hundreds of people. But you want to start by just considering that interviews are an assessment tool that's supposed to help you get information, from the candidate and exchange information to each other. And so you don't start with the questions. The first thing you want to do is actually map out the target. What is it that I'm actually trying to learn? What are the skills that that are important for this job, for working at my company, before you even kind of craft those questions? Because the last thing you want to do is go in and wing it. There's going to be tons of bias. You're going to get a ton of noise. There's so much research out there about this. You could end up in legal trouble.
By the way, I thought, and just to ask, I don't want to get to the questions in a second, but I thought there's so much bias and noise that on some level I've kind of come to the conclusion that it doesn't really matter what questions I ask, because the interview is going to be somewhat useless other than me getting a read on whether I want to work with the person otherwise. So literally 99% of my interviews, and we're interviewing for 2 roles actively now at Beta, I start with like, okay, what are your questions for me? And then I tell them like my philosophy, which is true, is to get to know the person and understand what they want. But I'm assessing them only by virtue of what they're asking me. And I don't know if that's a BS technique or not, but keep going. But that's how skeptical I am about the value of interviews.
Yeah, that's because you're kind of winging it. And I'd say, you kind of even can go back. The Nobel Prize winning psychologist Daniel Kahneman, he showed that humans easily anchor our judgments around a very small amount of information instead of seeing the bigger, more accurate picture. And so we allow these cognitive biases to creep in. And so by you going and saying, I'm just going to kind of figure it out as we go, you're actually allowing a bunch of cognitive bias to creep in.
Well, except so I'm not figuring it out as we go. I'm starting by saying, I don't know how to figure it out. And so I just ask the candidate, ask me a bunch of questions. And then I see what they say and where the conversation goes and answer their questions. I'm not, so it is, I definitely have a crisp plan. It's all written down, but my plan is not to have a list of questions that I ask them.
Yeah. Well, so, the research and the data out there shows by having that list of questions and running a structured interview process, you're going to double, triple. Yeah.
So give me an example then of, so like, let's say I'm trying to assess whether somebody is going to be a good salesperson, some typical role that gets hired for a lot. I'm trying to assess whether they can build skills with a client, whatever my package of skills is. I've like written down my criteria. Ideally, I have some rubric I use on the back end to fill in a form. We have that. So then how do I decide what questions to ask?
Okay, so from there, you want to, so you're going to have this bag of skills that you're trying to interview for. And the first thing you want to try to do is kind of prioritize, because you have limited amount of time to actually kind of get through everything that's there. And the candidate doesn't have as much time either. So you prioritize this list, and then you say, all right, I want to understand their verbal communication. I want to understand their persuasive ability. I want to understand, if they're going to walk into a situation and have to kind of figure it out as they go. How well do they deal with ambiguity and problem solve, all of that. And so from there, you can then craft behavioral questions or situational questions that will help you kind of extract that information. So it might be for a salesperson, like, walk me through a time when you were dealing with a customer that was using a competitor's software, and how did you try to convince them to switch to yours? And so then you're asking something that's like job related. They can pull from their experience in the past, and you're going to get a bunch of signal on different skills going through that. And the list goes on, but the right way is starting with, okay, here are the skills that I'm going to focus on and prioritize, and then let me figure out a set of questions that I want to ask, and I'm going to ask every candidate that comes through here, because it's going to reduce that bias. It's going to focus on that job relatedness, get me out of my head of trying to guess what questions I should ask or looking at their resume. And then you run that high quality structured process. The other thing you could do, which we really, in my company, we really we use ourselves and we suggest, and is a great process, is sharing those questions in advance with the candidates, so they come in, they can think about good examples, they can give you good information, because again, this is all about information exchange, and I want the highest quality information you can give me. So I would rather you take some time to think about what's the best example, and then we have a high quality conversation about it.
Got it. That makes tons of sense to me. Well, that's like awesome, not advice. In the sense, I mean, obviously for you, in the case of your expertise, it is. Most of the reason it's usually not advice is because I realize this, I'm going to use your language, is the person giving advice is winging it. They're just speaking from their own personal experience, which means that their advice is either justifying the choices that they've made, or it's worse, living vicariously through the other person. In your case, the reason I would classify what you said as advice is you're talking about research-driven techniques that are shown to be successful in a wide range of cases, and not Amit thinks what you really should do is ask the question that starts with a T, because if the question starts with a T, then you learn some magical voodoo thing about the person.
Definitely. No, this is very much research-backed stuff. And it's funny because, like, this data and this research has been out there for a very long time, but we're kind of caught up in this world where, like, we see how people interview in movies, or we think back to 10, 15 years ago when Google and Microsoft and Facebook were asking brain teasers and doing things, all that stuff, which has been debunked by research and science, filled with bias, gives you a bunch of noise, isn't job related. So we know how to do this. It's just, it actually requires you to put in that work in advance to do it right.
I love that. All right. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing you maybe next week.
Yeah.
And for folks who are out there, the way we get these questions is by talking to people we trust, but also you have questions, you have feedback, find us on the internet. To be continued. Thank you.